At 11:47 on the night that was supposed to be my wedding, my fiancé still believed he could order me out of his family's ballroom. At 11:59, his father placed the black and gold Cho family seal beside my name. By sunrise, I was legally Mrs. Cho. 6 months later, the man who had called me a 4-year convenience stood before the board, watching the empire he had expected since childhood pass into my hands. My name is Seraphine Okoye. I gave up my jewelry studio, my calendar, and 4 years of my ambition to help Dae-hyun Cho become the next head of the Cho Group. On the morning of our wedding, I discovered that he had secretly married his executive assistant the night before for what he called true love. He expected me to disappear quietly so his family's guests would remain comfortable. Instead, I walked into the reception wearing the wedding dress I had designed with my own hands, sat beside Chairman Yohan Cho, and made one decision that changed the order of the entire dynasty. This is how the woman 300 guests expected to watch beg became the woman holding the deed to the empire, and it began with a phone I was never supposed to touch. The morning of my wedding, I was sitting in the bridal suite of the Hanul Grand Hotel while a stylist pinned the last curl of my hair into place. My mother, Adaes, kept fussing with my veil like it might fly away. My dress was ivory silk, hand-beaded, the kind of dress you save for one day in your whole life. I'd designed the beadwork myself. I designed jewelry too, back before Dae-hyun asked me to focus on the family instead. 4 years of my calendar had belonged to him, his schedule, his mother's teas, his company's charity galas. I told myself it was what a good partner did. His phone buzzed on the vanity where he'd left it the night before after a business dinner. I wasn't going to look. I want that on record. But the screen lit up with a name I recognized, Yuna Baik, his executive assistant, the woman who had somehow been at every dinner, every retreat, every unavoidable late night for the past year. Did you sign it? Are we really married? I can't believe last night actually happened. I love you, Dae-hyun. Forever, not just for a paper. I read it twice. Then a third time, in case grief had rewritten the words into something less catastrophic. It hadn't. I called Dae-hyun. He picked up on the first ring, which told me everything he'd been waiting to see if I'd find out this way instead of from him. "Sarah," he said, and there was no apology in his voice, only irritation, like I'd caught him in a minor scheduling conflict. "I was going to tell you before the ceremony." "Tell me what? That you got a marriage certificate with Yuna last night? While I was getting my dress steamed? It's not what you think. Yuna and I, we didn't plan for it to happen like this. It's real, Sarah. What we have is real. What you and I have, it's 4 years of convenience. You know that. 4 years of convenience." That was the phrase he used. Not 4 years of postponed jewelry shows. Not 4 years of holding his father's company together during a hostile takeover attempt. Not the 11 times I'd sat beside his bed in the hospital during his ulcer flare-ups because his own mother couldn't be bothered to leave a business trip early. Convenience. "Where are you right now?" I said. Not a question. A demand. "At the courthouse annex. We just filed." "Sarah, please don't make a scene at the reception. My father has business partners there. Just let's handle this quietly. I'll make sure you're taken care of." Taken care of? Like I was an asset to be liquidated on his way out. I hung up. My mother was staring at me, half a hairpin still between her fingers. "Sarah, what happened?" "Dae-hyun married Yuna last night," I said. "Legally. There's a certificate." My mother's face didn't crumble the way I expected. It hardened, the way it always did when the Okoye family's social standing was at risk. "You cannot let this become public before the reception. Do you understand me? The Cho family funds half of your father's supply contracts. If this wedding collapses in front of everyone, we are finished. You go out there, you smile, you let them announce a small delay, and we fix this quietly, like adults." I looked at my mother in her mother-of-the-bride gown that cost more than most people's rent, worried about supply contracts while her daughter's engagement disintegrated in real time. "No," I said. "Excuse me?" I said no. I am not smiling my way through my own humiliation so Dad doesn't lose a contract. I stood up. The dress I'd beaded with my own hands felt suddenly like armor instead of a costume. I was going to that reception, just not to apologize for anything. Let me back up, because you need to understand what those 4 years actually looked like before I tell you what happened in that ballroom, because otherwise none of it will make sense to you. I met Dae-hyun Cho when I was 26, at a jewelry exhibition in Gangnam, where I was showing my first independent collection hand-forged pieces inspired by West African textile patterns translated into gold and garnet. He came to the exhibition with his mother, In-suk, who was scouting designers for a charity auction. He didn't buy anything that night. He came back the next day, alone, and bought the centerpiece of my collection, a garnet choker I'd spent 6 months designing, and asked me to dinner. For the first year, he was exactly the man I thought I wanted. Attentive. Curious about my work. He'd sit through my sketches for hours, asking questions that made me feel like my ambition was something to be admired rather than managed. I didn't notice the shift happening until it had already happened, the way his questions slowly turned from, "Tell me about this piece," to "Do you really need to travel for this show?" to, eventually, "A Cho wife doesn't need an outside career. Sarah, you'll have the whole foundation to run." I told myself it was practical. I told myself giving up the studio was temporary, that once we were married, I'd have more freedom, not less. I was wrong on both counts, and I spent 3 years finding new ways not to admit it to myself. The Cho family's engagement reception held the night before the actual ceremony, a Cho tradition. All their business partners and the Seoul underworld's more legitimate faces gathered in one ballroom at the Hanul Grand in the heart of Gangnam was already underway when I walked in. If you have ever seen a hotel built to impress people before they even reach the doors, you know the kind of light, gold spilling across the pavement, as though the building itself were daring ordinary people to feel small. 300 guests, chandeliers dripping gold light. And at the center of the room, Dae-hyun, in his tuxedo, with Yoon Baek beside him in a white dress that was absolutely, unmistakably a wedding dress. The room went quiet in that specific way. A room goes quiet when everyone already knows something you don't and is bracing for the moment you find out. "Sarah!" Dae-hyun said, too loud, performing calm for the room. "You're early. We were going to explain everything properly. After what? After I found out from a group chat you forgot to hide?" I said. My voice carried further than I meant it to. "Good. Let it carry." Yuna's chin lifted. She'd clearly rehearsed this moment in a mirror somewhere. "Dae-hyun and I didn't plan this, Sarah. Sometimes the heart just knows. We fought it for so long, out of respect for you, but last night it just happened. We got the certificate. It's done. I'm sorry you had to find out today, of all days." "You're sorry I found out today," I repeated. "Not sorry you spent a year sleeping with my fiancé." "Sarah, don't embarrass yourself," Dae-hyun said, and there it was the tone he used with hotel staff and interns, not with me, not until today. "Everyone here knows how hard you tried to hold on to this relationship. Let's not make it worse. I want you to understand something about that room. It was full of powerful people, Cho family associates, business partners, a scattering of men in dark suits standing along the walls the way men who work for organizations that don't advertise themselves tend to stand. And every single one of them was watching me to see if I would beg. I didn't beg. I laughed. Not a performance laugh, a real one. The kind that comes out when a situation is so absurd your body refuses to cry about it instead. 4 years, I said. 4 years I ran your father's charity gala logistics because your mother couldn't be bothered. 4 years I sat in hospital rooms while your ulcer flared because you couldn't handle stress like a functioning adult. 4 years I gave up my own design studio because you said a Cho wife shouldn't have outside ambitions. And you tell me it just happened, like a rainstorm, like something that fell on you. Sarah, I'm not finished. You want to marry Yoona for true love? Fine, marry her. But you do not get to stand there in front of 300 people and tell me to be quiet about it. That's when I noticed him, the man at the head table who hadn't said a word this entire time. Chairman Yohan Cho, Dae-hyun's father, the actual founder and controlling shareholder of the Cho Group, a man the tabloids loved to photograph because he almost never gave interviews, almost never smiled, and ran an empire that stretched from shipping to private security to 3 companies nobody discussed too loudly at dinner parties. He was watching me with an expression I couldn't place. Not embarrassment, not pity. Something closer to respect. Dae-hyun, the chairman said. Quiet, but the kind of quiet that made the whole room lean in to hear it. Is this true? You obtained a marriage certificate with Miss Baek last night, the night before your wedding to Miss Okoye? Dae-hyun's jaw tightened. Father, I can explain. That is not an answer to my question. Yes, Dae-hyun said. It's true. But father, Yuna is who I actually love. Sarah and I, it was always more of an arrangement. You know that. I watched something shift in Chairman Yohan Cho's face. Not surprise. Recognition, maybe, of a pattern he'd seen before, in himself or someone close to him. An arrangement, the chairman repeated. Miss Okoye rebuilt the Incheon logistics contract single-handedly after your negotiating error nearly lost it. I know because I had the recovery briefs traced after the board credited you. The analysis was hers. The revised terms were hers. Even the risk notes in the margins were hers. Dae-hyun's face changed. The chairman continued. Miss Okoye also sat beside your hospital bed for 11 nights that I know of, because I had someone informed each time, since you did not think to tell me yourself. I have watched her protect your name for 4 years while you accepted the credit. And you call that an arrangement. The room had gone so, still I could hear the ice shifting in someone's drink 3 tables away. Father, this isn't the time. No, Chairman Yohan said, standing. It is exactly the time. He turned to me. Miss Okoye, I owe you an apology on behalf of my family. I will not insult you by asking you to stay for a wedding that clearly isn't happening tonight. Thank you, I said. But I don't need your apology, Chairman Cho. I need everyone in this room to understand that I am not the woman who got left behind tonight. I don't know what made me say what I said next. Maybe it was watching my mother's face across the room, still hoping I'd smooth this over for the sake of a supply contract. Maybe it was 4 years of swallowed opinions finally finding a door. Maybe it was the particular, specific fury of watching Dae-hyun reach for Yuna's hand like I was an inconvenience he'd already filed away. Chairman Cho, I said. You built this company from nothing while your son was still in diapers. You've run it for 30 years without ever once handing real authority to anyone who hadn't earned it, including, apparently, your own son, since half this room can see he isn't ready for what you're planning to give him. I respect that. I respect competence. I have not seen a shred of it from your son in 4 years, only from myself, cleaning up after him. So here's an idea. Since neither of us appears to have anyone worth marrying in this room tonight, marry me instead. Not for love. For the same reason you built everything else you own, because it's the smart move, and because I am the only person in this room who has actually proven I can run something. Someone dropped a glass. I heard it shatter against marble somewhere behind me, and I didn't even flinch. Yuna laughed, sharp and disbelieving. She's clearly hysterical. Someone get her some water. Dae-hyun looked, for the first time all night, genuinely frightened. Not of losing me. Of what his father might actually say next. Chairman Yohan Cho studied me for a long moment. Then, for the first time that entire evening, he smiled. It was small. It was terrifying, in the way real power always is when it finally decides to move. Miss Okoye, he said, walk with me. We stepped out onto the terrace, away from the crowd, away from Dae-hyun's stammering and Yuna's furious whispering and my mother's barely contained panic. The city lights spread out below us, cold and glittering. You understand what you just said in there, the chairman said. It wasn't a question. I understand exactly what I said. Most people who say something like that to me by morning regret it very much. I don't regret things, I said. I've spent 4 years regretting the things I let other people talk me out of saying. I'm done with that particular hobby. He studied me the way you study a ledger you suspect has been undervalued. You rebuilt the Incheon contract. I did. You've run design and production lines with better margins than half my division heads under someone else's name, for free. I have. And you would marry a man 24 years your senior, whom you've spoken 3 sentences to in your life, purely as a business decision. I would marry a man who has run an empire successfully for 30 years and has apparently never once mistaken loyalty for weakness, I said. That's not a small thing to me right now, Chairman Cho. I've had my fill of men who confuse being loved with being managed. He was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the skyline that, I would soon learn, was dotted with buildings his companies owned outright. There is something you should know about me before you decide this is a good idea, he said. I am not a gentleman, Miss Okoye. I did not build what I built by being gentle. There are parts of this business that exist in rooms your fiancé, your former fiancé, has never been permitted to enter, because he has never earned the right to know what happens in them. If you marry into this family, you marry into all of it, not just the charity galas. I've spent 4 years watching your son fumble decisions that could have destroyed 300 jobs and clean up his messes so quietly no one even thanked me for it, I said. I am not afraid of difficult rooms, Chairman Cho. I'm afraid of wasting my life pretending to be smaller than I am so a man's ego stays intact. He nodded once, like a signature on a contract. Then we do this without pretending it is something it is not. He removed a slim black folder from the inside pocket of his jacket. I learned later that Chairman Yohan Cho carried emergency authority documents whenever the full family council gathered. Inside was a marriage agreement prepared years earlier by his legal office and never used, along with the succession protections required by the Cho family charter. He placed it on the terrace table between us. You will retain your name, your independent assets, and complete authority over any work you build, he said. No obedience clause, no decorative title, no access to your personal accounts. If you choose to leave after 1 year, you leave with what you created, and nothing you brought into this marriage becomes mine. I stared at him. Dae-hyun had spent 4 years calling control protection. His father had just offered me freedom in writing before asking for a signature. And what do you receive? I asked. A partner the council cannot dismiss as temporary, a successor candidate with proven judgment, and the satisfaction of correcting my son's belief that loyalty is disposable. That last part sounds personal. It is. He looked directly at me. You have 15 minutes to walk away, Miss Okoye. If you sign, there will be a private civil ceremony before midnight, and the registration will be filed at dawn. No one will force you. Not your mother. Not my family. Not me. For the first time that day, a powerful man gave me a choice without trying to steer the answer. I read every page. Then I signed. At 11:59, a senior magistrate who had served the Cho family for 3 decades witnessed our vows in a private library beside the ballroom. There were no flowers, no music, and no promises we did not yet mean. Only 2 signatures, 2 witnesses, and the heavy black and gold family seal pressed into wax beside my new name. By sunrise, I was legally Mrs. Cho, just not the one anyone in that ballroom had expected to carry the title. The next morning, the headlines were vicious and delighted in equal measure. My mother called 11 times before I answered, and when I did, she wasn't apologizing for pushing me to smile through my own humiliation the day before. She was asking if there was any way to get an introduction to the chairman's other business contacts. Some people never change. I was starting to understand I might have to build a family of my own from people who could. Dae-hyun showed up at the Cho estate 3 days later, uninvited, storming past the household staff and into the study where Chairman Yohan and I were reviewing quarterly reports from the shipping division. He looked like he hadn't slept. "You did this to humiliate me," he said, pointing at me like I was a stain on the carpet. "You couldn't stand losing, so you took my father instead." "Sit down, Dae-hyun," his father said, not looking up from the report in his hands. "Father, this is insane. She's your son's ex-fiancée. People are laughing at us, at me." "People are laughing at you," Chairman Yohan agreed, calmly, "because you obtained a marriage certificate the night before your own wedding and were foolish enough to leave your phone unattended. That laughter belongs entirely to you. Miss Okoye, my wife had nothing to do with your poor judgment. Your wife," Dae-hyun spat the word like it tasted bad. "She's using you. She's always been ambitious, Father. You don't know her the way I do. I know her well enough to know she saved the Incheon contract you nearly lost through carelessness," his father said, finally looking up. "I know she has sat in a hospital room for you 11 times without complaint, and that you have never once thanked her for it in any way I've observed. Ambitious is not an insult in this house, Dae-hyun. It should not be one in yours, either." Dae-hyun turned to me, and for a moment I saw something almost like fear beneath the anger. "What do you want, Sarah? Money? Say it. I'll write the check right now and you can disappear." "I don't want your money," I said. I never did. I wanted a partner who saw what I built and valued it instead of asking me to hide it. Your father offered me that in one conversation on a terrace. You had 4 years and never managed it once. He left without another word, but not before Unibike, waiting in the hallway, apparently unable to resist listening at the door, hissed something at me that I chose not to dignify with a response. It would not be the last time. That evening, Yohan took me beneath the Cho estate to a room Dae-hyun had never been permitted to enter. There were no chandeliers there, no cameras, no charity banners, only a long black table, 12 empty chairs, and a wall map marked with the ports, warehouses, security routes, and private alliances that formed the hidden spine beneath the Cho Group's public empire. This is why the press calls us a corporation and our rivals call us a family, Yohan said. The legitimate companies are real. So are the agreements that keep those companies from being swallowed by men who do not respect courts. I looked at the family seal carved into the center of the table. Are you telling me the rumors are true? I am telling you that influence has layers. Some are exercised in boardrooms. Some are exercised through loyalty, debt, and the certainty that a Cho promise will be honored. We do not traffic people. We do not harm families. We do not tolerate drugs moving through our ports. Those are my rules, and every alliance at this table survives because I enforce them. And Dae-hyun? He liked the title. He never earned the rules. Yohan opened a second ledger, bound in black leather. It contained names, obligations, old disputes, and agreements older than some of the companies listed on the stock exchange. If you remain my wife, Seraphine, people will test whether you are merely wearing my name or whether the name answers when you speak. I will not hide that from you. I should have been frightened. I was. But fear and weakness are not the same thing. Then teach me the difference between a promise and a threat in this family, I said. For the first time, he looked at me, not as the woman who had rescued herself in his ballroom, but as someone he might one day trust with the rooms beneath it. The weeks that followed taught me two things quickly. My new husband ran his empire the way a surgeon runs an operating table, with precision and zero patience for sentiment. And he was, against every expectation I'd walked in with, unfailingly fair to me. He gave me full authority over the design and production division, not as a courtesy title, but with real budget, real staff, real consequences if I failed. My first morning in the office, half the division heads treated me like a scandal they were being forced to manage, rather than a supervisor they were expected to answer to. I understood why. I had gone, in the space of one headline cycle, from the ex-fiancé to the chairman's wife, and neither label told anyone in that building a single useful thing about whether I could actually do the job. So I didn't waste time convincing them with speeches. I asked for the quarterly production numbers from the previous 2 years, stayed in the office until 11 that first night, going through every supply contract line by line, and by morning I had found exactly what I suspected. I would find 3 supply lines that had been renegotiated under Dae-hyun's direction at rates that made no sense for a company our size, the kind of oversight that happens when someone signs a contract to look decisive rather than to actually protect the business. "These numbers can't be right," said Ren Junho, the division's operations manager, when I laid the discrepancy across his desk. He'd worked under Dae-hyun for 6 years and had the tired, careful posture of a man who'd learned not to say anything a superior didn't want to hear. "They're right," I said. I checked them against the vendor's public filings twice. "We've been overpaying by roughly 11% on the Busan textile contract alone for the last 2 years. Renegotiate it this week. If they won't move, I want 3 competing quotes on my desk by Friday." He looked at me for a long moment, the way people look at you when they're deciding whether you're about to disappear, the way the last person in this chair probably did. The last person who tried to renegotiate that contract was told not to make waves before the wedding, he said carefully. "I'm not planning a wedding anymore, Mr. Ren," I said. "I'm planning a quarter. Get me the numbers." He got me the numbers. By the end of that first week, I had restructured 3 underperforming supply lines that had been bleeding money for 2 years because no one had bothered to question them. I did it without threatening anyone. I simply read the documents no one else had apparently found time to read. That should have been my first victory. Instead, it became my first test. One of the cancelled suppliers belonged to a port alliance called the Hanil Circle, a group that had honored its agreements with the Cho family for 20 years and expected those agreements to survive whether the numbers made sense or not. The morning after I terminated their contract, 6 black vehicles arrived beneath headquarters. Ren Junho appeared at my office door, looking as though he had forgotten how to breathe. "Chairman Cho is on his way," he said. "The Hanyul representatives are asking for the person who cancelled the contract." "That would be me! They know!" Yohan called before I reached the private conference floor. "I can handle this," he said. "You told me people would test whether your name answers when I speak." A pause. "Yes, then let me speak." The Hanyul delegation sat on one side of the black table, led by an older man named Director Moon. He did not raise his voice. Men with real influence rarely need to. "Your predecessor understood loyalty," he said. "The Cho family paid a premium because our routes remained open when others closed." "I read the history," I said. "I also read the last 8 quarters. Your route reliability fell 19%, your insurance claims doubled, and 3 shipments disappeared between Busan and Incheon." His eyes narrowed. "You accuse us of theft?" "No, I am giving you the opportunity not to make me investigate it as theft." The room became very still. I slid a revised contract across the table. "The Cho family will honor 20 years of loyalty. You keep the route, but the premium becomes performance-based. Recover your reliability within 90 days, and you earn more than the old contract paid. Miss the standard, and the work moves elsewhere. Loyalty protects relationships. It does not excuse failure." Director Moon looked past me toward Yohan, who had entered without a sound and remained near the door. "Does your wife speak for you?" Yohan's answer came without hesitation. "She speaks for the Cho group." That was the moment the room changed. Director Moon studied the revised terms, then signed. As the delegation left, he paused beside me. "Your husband usually frightens people before he gives them a choice. I prefer giving them a choice that frightens them into becoming better." His mouth twitched. It was not quite a smile, but it was close enough. My second week, I secured a partnership with an Italian luxury house that Dae-hyun had been chasing, unsuccessfully, for 18 months, not through leverage, but because I flew to Milan myself, sat down with their creative director, and asked what they actually wanted from a Korean partner instead of pitching them what our company assumed they wanted to hear. "How?" Yohan asked me over dinner, the first genuinely curious question he'd asked me since the terrace. "Did you manage in 2 weeks what my son couldn't manage in a year and a half?" I asked them what they actually wanted instead of what I assumed they wanted, I said. "It's not complicated. It's just work most people are too proud to do." He almost smiled. It was becoming a habit of his, I noticed, in my presence specifically small, private smiles that his staff told me, quietly, they had never seen before I arrived. But not everyone was pleased with my success. Dae-hyun's mother, Chairman Yohan's ex-wife, a woman named In-suk who had divorced him years earlier but retained a minority stake and a seat on the board out of old habit, began circling like a shark that had smelled blood in unfamiliar water. "You do understand," In-suk said to me at a board dinner, sliding into the seat beside me with the practiced ease of someone who'd been undermining people at these tables for decades, "that Yohan doesn't actually love you. Whatever performance he's putting on for the board, it's strategy. He's punishing Dae-hyun. You're a tool, dear, not a wife. Then I'm a very effective tool," I said. The Italian partnership alone increased division revenue by 22% this quarter. I'd take that deal even if love had nothing to do with it. Don't be smug. Men like Yohan don't stay loyal to convenient arrangements. The moment you stop being useful, or the moment Dae-hyun finally grows up and proves himself, you'll be the ex-wife at these dinners instead of me. I smiled at her, the way you smile at a competitor who's shown you their whole strategy for free. Noted. I'll make sure I never stop being useful, then. She didn't like that answer. I could tell because she didn't have another one ready. There was one afternoon during those early weeks I still think about more than almost any of the confrontations that followed. Yohan found me in the design studio he'd given me on the top floor of the headquarters building. Late, surrounded by sketches for the company's flagship anniversary collection, a line that had, for the last decade, been designed by outside consultants because no one internally had ever been trusted with it. "You're still here," he said, not a question, setting a cup of tea on the corner of my desk without being asked. "I used to design things like this before I convinced myself it wasn't a serious career," I said. I forgot how much I missed it until I sat down tonight and realized no one in this building was going to tell me to put it away. He picked up one of the sketches, a necklace built around a garnet centerpiece. the kind of deep, unapologetic red I hadn't let myself work with in years, because Dae-hyun had once told me it looked too loud for a Cho event. "This is exceptional," he said, and there was no performance in the way he said it, no strategy, just a man looking at something well-made and saying so plainly. "Why does the sketch feel unfinished to you? I can see it in your face. You don't like it yet." "I do like it," I said. "I think I've just spent so long designing things that were acceptable instead of things that were true that I forgot what the difference felt like. I'm relearning it. It's slower than I expected." "Take the time you need," he said. "I did not marry a design consultant, Seraphine. I married the only person I have met in 30 years of running this company who still remembers what it feels like to build something because it's true, not because it's safe. I would rather wait for the true version." I finished the collection 3 weeks later. It launched to the best reviews the company's jewelry line had received in a decade, and Yohan wore a small garnet pin from it, the same deep, unapologetic red, to every board meeting after that. It was a quiet, deliberate signal to anyone paying attention about exactly whose work he was standing behind. But that same night, after the launch guests had gone, I found him alone in the gallery and asked the question I had been avoiding. "What happens when I stop being useful to you?" He turned slowly. "Why would you ask me that?" "Because your former wife said I am a tool. Dae-hyun treated me like one. Everyone praises me when the numbers rise, but I need to know whether this marriage disappears the first quarter I fail." Yohan took off the garnet pin and placed it carefully in my palm. "I spent most of my life believing usefulness was the safest form of attachment," he said. "People can betray affection. Numbers are easier. Contracts are cleaner." "That is not an answer." "No, it is an admission." He looked toward the collection I had designed, not the sales report beside it. "I admired you before you became my wife. I had read your Incheon briefs. I knew who had repaired my son's mistakes, even when the reports carried his name. But I did not marry you only because you were competent. I married you because, in the worst moment of your life, you refused to surrender your dignity for the comfort of powerful people. That cannot be measured in a quarter. And if I fail, then we correct the failure. We do not erase the person." Something in me loosened at those words. Dae-hyun had loved my usefulness and resented my strength. Yohan was the first man who seemed capable of separating what I achieved from what I was worth. He closed my fingers around the pin. "Wear it tomorrow," he said. "I would like the room to understand that I stand behind your work. But more importantly, I would like you to remember that I stand beside you when no room is watching." Yuna's campaign was less subtle. She started appearing at company events she had no reason to attend, always positioned near Dae-hyun, always dressed like she was already the woman running this family's public image. Rumors began surfacing in the business press, unnamed sources close to the Cho family, suggesting the chairman's marriage was a stunt, that his real successor plans still centered on his son, that I was a temporary embarrassment being quietly managed until the scandal cooled. I didn't correct the rumors. I let them run, because I understood something Yuna and In-suk and Dae-hyun hadn't figured out yet. Chairman Yohan Cho didn't operate on rumor. He operated on results, and every quarter, my results were the only ones in that boardroom actually improving. 3 months into the marriage, he called me into his study late one night, the way he did when something serious needed discussing. "The board wants a formal successor announcement within the year," he said, without preamble. "Dae-hyun assumes it will be him. He has been telling associates as much for years." "And what do you want?" I asked. "I want the person who has demonstrated they can actually run this company without burning it down," he said. "I have watched you for 3 months, Seraphine. You do not need me to protect you in rooms. You need me to stop underestimating you the way everyone else has. Are you offering me the company, Chairman Cho, or are you testing whether I'll ask for it?" "Both," he said. "I find I no longer enjoy separating the two questions where you're concerned." It was the closest thing to an admission of feeling he'd offered me since the terrace, and it landed harder than I expected it to. Somewhere in 3 months of restructured supply chains and late-night strategy sessions and quiet dinners where he actually listened to my opinions instead of performing patience while waiting to give his own, something had shifted between strategy and something else. I wasn't ready to name it yet, but I noticed it. Dae-hyun noticed the shift in the wind before I did, or at least noticed it faster than his pride could tolerate. He requested no, demanded a private meeting with his father, and insisted I be present, which told me he intended to perform his outrage in front of an audience. "You cannot seriously be considering her for the successor role," he said, the moment the study door closed. "Father, she has been married into this family for 3 months. 3 months. I have been groomed for this position for 15 years. You have occupied a position for 15 years, his father said. Grooming implies growth. What have you actually built in that time that I did not have to quietly repair behind you? That's not fair. Fair would be handing you an empire because you were born into it, regardless of whether you can hold it, Yohan said. I did not build this company by being fair. I built it by being accurate. And the accurate assessment, Dae-hyun, is that your wife, your former fiancé, has generated more verifiable value for this company in 3 months than you have in 3 years. This is because of her, Dae-hyun said, jabbing a finger toward me. She turned you against me. No, I said, quietly. You did that yourself, the night you left your phone unlocked on a vanity and thought no one would check it. He looked like he wanted to throw something. Instead, he turned and walked out, and I heard him on the phone in the hallway minutes later, voice low and furious, talking to someone I'd later learn was Yuna, already plotting the next move. That move arrived 2 weeks later, and this time they did not attack my marriage. They attacked the one thing the board could not ignore my record. A leaked document surfaced in the financial press internal Cho Group figures, doctored to suggest I had inflated the Italian partnership's numbers to manufacture a success I hadn't actually earned. The story ran with a headline dripping in implication. WCHO Wifes, Myrasak DSL Deal, Undar Investigaten FR fraud. I knew immediately who had access to those internal figures and a motive to twist them. So did Chairman Yohan. I did not falsify anything, I told him, laying the original documentation across his desk before he'd even finished reading the article. Every number in this leak has been altered. Compare it to the audited originals. He didn't need long. He'd built an empire on knowing exactly what a real ledger looked like versus a manufactured one. I know, he said. I already had the audit team pull the source files an hour ago. This was altered after the fact, and clumsily. Whoever did this wanted to embarrass you quickly, not convincingly. Dae-hyun doesn't have access to the internal systems anymore, does he? He does not. But Unibike, as his executive assistant of record for over a year, still had residual access that should have been revoked when she left the company after their marriage became public. An oversight on my legal team's part. One I intend to correct today. The correction was swift and, I would learn, entirely characteristic of how Chairman Yohan Cho handled betrayal. He didn't threaten anyone publicly. He didn't need to. Within 48 hours, 3 of Dae-hyun's remaining board allies quietly withdrew their support for his eventual successor bid, having been shown privately, calmly, with documentation exactly how the leaked figures had been fabricated and by whom. The financial press ran a quiet correction. The story died before it could spread the way Yuna had clearly hoped it would. But the chairman wasn't finished. At the next board meeting, in front of every director who had spent months whispering that my marriage was a temporary embarrassment, he made an announcement that changed the shape of everything. Effective immediately, he said, I am formally naming Seraphine Cho as Deputy Chief Executive, with a ratified succession clause placing her as my direct successor upon my retirement or incapacitation. This decision is based entirely on performance metrics available to every person in this room. I would ask the board to review the attached figures before raising objections, since I have already reviewed them personally, extensively, and repeatedly. Dae-hyun, present as a non-voting observer by tradition, went white. Father, you can't, I can, and I have, Yohan said. You will retain your current division role, provided your performance there improves substantially. I would suggest you focus your energy on that, rather than on undermining your stepmother's reputation through leaked, falsified documents, a matter my legal team is prepared to discuss with you privately, should you wish to contest this decision publicly. The room went dead silent, the specific silence of powerful people recalculating who actually held power in front of them. Yuna, who had been sitting in on the meeting as Dae-hyun's guest despite having no formal role left in the company, stood up so fast her chair scraped audibly against the floor. This is insane. She married you out of spite. Everyone knows it. You're letting a woman who used your son's humiliation to climb into a fortune run your entire company, Miss Baek, Chairman Yohan said, and his voice dropped into a register I hadn't heard from him before. The one, I understood later, that had built the parts of his empire people didn't discuss at dinner parties. You are not a shareholder. You are not an employee. You are, as of this moment, a guest who has overstayed her welcome in a room she was never invited to speak in. Security will show you out. I watched her get escorted from the boardroom, face red with a fury she had no leverage left to back up, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel watching it. Not triumph, exactly. Recognition. The particular, quiet satisfaction of watching someone who profited from your humiliation discover, in real time, that the ground under them had never been as solid as they assumed. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 2 weeks after the board meeting, the consequences moved beyond gossip and falsified spreadsheets. I stayed late, finishing quarter-end projections when Ren Junho knocked on my door, pale, holding his phone like it might bite him. Mrs. Cho, representatives from Union Star Holdings are downstairs. They do not have an appointment. Union Star had spent a decade trying to take control of the Cho Group's port contracts. Publicly, it was a shipping conglomerate. Privately, it led an alliance that challenged the Cho family's authority along the southern routes. I understood immediately why they had come after the succession announcement. They believed the new wife would be the softer target. Send them to the Black Conference Room, I said, and have security remain visible outside. No one enters unless I call. 3 men arrived, led by Director Baek, a heavy-set man with an expensive suit and the unhurried confidence of someone accustomed to watching others retreat. He placed a folder on the table. "We are prepared to offer favorable terms for the Cho shipping division," he said. "Enough for you to step away before your position becomes dangerous." Dangerous to whom? To a woman who entered this family through scandal and now stands between its heir and his inheritance. There it was. Not an offer. A message. "Who told you Dae-hyun remained the heir?" Director Baek smiled. "Blood has a way of correcting temporary decisions." I opened his folder. The proposal valued the division at less than half its audited worth and transferred 3 strategic port routes to Union Star. "You did not come to buy a company," I said. "You came to see whether I understood what I was holding. And do you?" I pushed the folder back. "The route agreements you want are protected by the Haniel Circle, the North Quay families, and 2 independent security contracts your legal team apparently failed to read. If you attempt a hostile transfer, every ship you own will spend the next 6 months waiting for inspections while your insurers reconsider whether you are worth covering." His smile disappeared. I continued. "You also approached the chairman's wife in a secured building after business hours and suggested her position might become dangerous. In the old language of the families, that is not negotiation. It is a threat made beneath another family's roof." The door opened behind me. Yohan entered wearing the same expression he had worn in the ballroom, the calm expression of a man whose anger had already become a decision. Director Baek stood. "Chairman Cho, we were only discussing an acquisition." "No," Yohan said. "You were testing my wife because someone told you she could be frightened away from what she earned." He looked at me. "Your answer?" "Union Star receives no stake, no route, and no second meeting. Their port insurance audit begins tomorrow through legitimate regulatory channels. If their records are clean, they have nothing to fear." A quiet approval moved through his eyes. Director Baek gathered his folder. "You are creating an unnecessary enemy." Yohan stepped aside and opened the door. "My wife gave you a graceful exit. I suggest you take it." After they left, security traced the introduction that had opened the meeting. It led through one of In-suk's legal advisors to an account controlled by Yuna. That discovery gave In-suk the argument she thought she needed. She filed a formal petition demanding an independent review of my succession clause, claiming Yohan had acted under emotional influence and that my performance record had been manufactured. The review lasted 6 hours. External auditors dissected every contract I had renegotiated, every figure from the Italian partnership, every route agreement, and every decision tied to my name. In-suk's lawyers expected to find a wife protected by her husband. Instead, they found documents. At the end of the hearing, Director Hwang, the independent auditor, closed her folder. We were asked to determine whether Mrs. Cho's authority was created by undue influence, she said. What we found is one of the most thoroughly documented performance records I have reviewed in 20 years. The petition is dismissed. I would advise the family to stop challenging a decision the evidence continues to strengthen. In-suk left before the room emptied. Yohan did not celebrate. He waited until we were alone and said, "They will call today a victory for you, wasn't it?" It was proof. Victory comes when no one can remove what you built. The next morning, he summoned the family council and converted my succession clause into an irrevocable controlling trust. The empire was no longer something I would receive only if he remained willing to give it. It was legally secured in my name. That night, Yohan and I sat on the same terrace where he'd first asked me to walk with him, months earlier. "You didn't have to defend me that publicly," I said. "You could have handled the falsified documents quietly and let the succession decision stand on its own." "I could have," he agreed. "I chose not to, because I am tired of watching people underestimate the value of what you've built, simply because they cannot imagine competence arriving in a form they didn't expect. I built an empire by refusing to make that mistake in business. I do not intend to make it in my marriage." "Is that what this is?" I asked. "A marriage, not just a merger?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the same skyline, the same lights. "I did not expect to feel anything when I asked you to walk with me that first night," he said. "I assumed I was simply making a sound business decision, the way I make all of them. I have found, over these past months, that I was wrong about the boundary between the two. You are the first person in a very long time I have wanted to build something with, rather than simply direct. I didn't have a clever line ready for that. For once, I just let the quiet sit there, comfortable, unforced, the way 4 years with Dae-hyun had never once managed to feel. The final confrontation came 6 months into the marriage, at the Cho Group's annual shareholders' gala, the same kind of room, the same chandeliers, though a different hotel, that had hosted the night everything began. Dae-hyun arrived, uninvited again, drunk enough to have lost whatever caution remained in him. Yuna trailing behind him in a dress clearly meant to make a statement she no longer had the standing to make. "You stole everything from me," Dae-hyun said, loud enough that the room, once again, went quiet around us. "My place, my inheritance, my father's respect. Everyone in this room knows you married him out of revenge." "I married your father," I said, "because he was the first man in this family to treat competence as a virtue instead of a threat. If that reads as revenge to you, I think it says more about how you've always understood value than it says about me." "You'll get bored eventually," Yuna cut in, desperate now, her voice pitched to carry. "Old men die, Sarah. What happens to your empire then, when he's gone and the board remembers you're not actually blood?" Chairman Yohan stepped forward before I could answer, and the room's attention swung to him instantly, the way it always did. "When I die," he said calmly, "the controlling trust ratified by this board transfers full interest to Seraphine Cho, independent of blood relation. Blood was never the metric I built this company on. Performance was." He signaled to the legal counsel beside the stage. A black folder embossed with the Cho crest was placed in my hands. Across its cover, in gold lettering, were 2 words every camera in the room could read. "Empire Deed." "This is not a promise for some distant future," Yohan continued. "The controlling shares are secured now. My wife does not inherit because she married me. She inherits because she proved she can protect what this family built." Dae-hyun stared at the folder as though he were watching his childhood disappear in real time. Yohan turned to Yuna. "Miss Baek, you have been asked to leave this family's events twice. There will not be a third invitation. Security didn't need to be called this time." Yuna left on her own, dragging a stunned, humiliated Dae-hyun behind her, past 300 guests who would spend the rest of the night discussing exactly what they'd just witnessed. I found my mother near the bar afterward, still working the room the way she always had, though her questions had changed shape over 6 months less about supply contracts now, more, carefully, about whether there might be room for reconciliation with the daughter she'd once told to smile through her own humiliation. "You did well tonight," she said, which was, from Dae's Okoye, close to an apology. "I did well 6 months ago too," I said. "You just weren't in the room paying attention to the right things yet." She didn't have an answer for that either. I was starting to understand that not having an answer, for people who'd spent their lives assuming they always would, was its own kind of ending. Yohan found me later, near the same terrace doors, and this time he didn't ask me to walk with him. He simply took my hand, in front of the whole room, in a gesture that had nothing strategic left in it at all. "I built an empire out of never mistaking loyalty for weakness," he said, quiet enough that only I could hear it. I did not expect, at my age, to find someone who taught me the difference between building an empire and building a life. "Thank you for correcting that particular blind spot, Seraphine." "You're welcome," I said. Though I'd point out you did offer me the empire first. The life part, I think, we built by accident. "The best things usually are," he said, and for the first time since I'd met him, on the worst night of what I thought was going to be my life. Chairman Yohan Cho smiled at me like a man, not a strategist. The months after the gala moved differently. Not easier. An empire the size of the Cho group does not become quiet simply because its loudest threats lose their microphones. But the ground beneath me felt steady, in a way it never had during my 4 years with Dae-hyun. Ren Junho stopped bringing me problems like a man asking permission to survive them. He brought them early, with solutions attached, because he trusted I would listen. Director Huang recommended me for an international industry board seat that had nothing to do with my marriage and everything to do with the records she had spent 6 hours trying and failing to disprove. My mother began calling less about contracts and more about me. The conversations were awkward at first. Rebuilding usually is. I did not pretend her choice on my wedding morning had not wounded me, and she did not receive forgiveness without accountability. But for the first time, she learned to ask what I needed before telling me what the family required. Dae-hyun's division numbers continued to fall. The board reassigned his operational authority to a professional management team that reported to me. He did not challenge the decision publicly. By then, even he understood that shouting could not restore an inheritance he had never earned. Yuna left him 3 months later. The woman he had married for true love discovered that love became less convincing when the title, influence, and guaranteed fortune disappeared. I did not celebrate their collapse. I did not need to. Their choices had finally become expensive enough for them to understand. Almost 1 year after the night of the ballroom, Yohan found me in the design studio holding the first piece from a new collection under my own name. Not Cho, Okoye. The centerpiece was a gold necklace built around a deep garnet stone, surrounded by patterns inspired by the textiles my grandmother had worn in Nigeria. It was the kind of piece Dae-hyun would once have called too loud. Yohan looked at it for a long time. "What did you name it?" he asked. "Unshaken," he nodded. "It suits you." "I was shaken," I admitted, that morning, in the review hearing, when Union Star came to the office, more times than I let anyone see. "Unshaken does not mean untouched by fear," he said. "It means fear did not choose your direction." I smiled. "You have become unexpectedly good at this." "At jewelry? At being a husband instead of a strategist?" He considered that. "I had an excellent teacher." Then he asked me whether I regretted the decision I had made in one wedding dress, on one terrace, after speaking to him only a handful of times. I looked through the studio glass at the company headquarters below us, the design floor I had rebuilt, the division I had repaired, the people who now knew my authority did not arrive through decoration. "I regret the 4 years I spent making myself smaller for a man who never noticed the sacrifice," I said. "I do not regret choosing differently when the truth finally became impossible to ignore." "You chose an empire." "No," I said. "I chose myself. The empire was what happened after." That was the lesson Dae-hyun never understood. He believed power was something inherited because a family had already written your name beside it. I learned power could be the moment a woman stopped begging to be chosen by someone committed to diminishing her. It could be walking into a ballroom where 300 people expected tears and refusing to give them the performance. It could be reading the contract, speaking in the room, building the numbers, protecting the people, and accepting love only when it arrived without asking you to disappear inside it. On the morning of my wedding, Dae-hyun called 4 years of my life a convenience. By midnight, I had stopped allowing him to define what those years meant. They had not been wasted. They had taught me every weakness in the empire he assumed would become his. They had trained my eye, hardened my judgment, and shown me exactly what happened when competent women allowed other people to sign their names beneath the work. He married his lover before our wedding for true love. I married his father because one man finally looked at everything I had built and refused to call my strength a problem. And when the empire passed into my hands, it was not revenge that made me ready to hold it. It was the woman I became the moment I stopped making myself smaller. If one word from Seraphine's journey belongs to you today, let it be this: unshaken. Write unshaken in the comments as your declaration that no betrayal, rejection, or closed door will make you forget what you are capable of building. And subscribe, because this is not the last story of an underestimated woman who walked into a powerful family and changed the order of everything.